When is that one time that you had to turn to the dark side? One day, my daughter came back from school and ran into my arms like she was scared. I could feel her shaking, so I took her inside and made some French toast, which was her favorite food. I thought she just had a really bad day and missed being at home, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Once she calmed down, she told me, "Mommy, something happened today, and I think I'm supposed to tell you about it." An uneasy knot formed itself in my heart when she told me that the school counselor had called her into his office for a special game. He handed my daughter a stuffed unicorn and told her that this new game was very popular with the children, which made my daughter excited and eager to learn. Then the counselor made her point the unicorn between his legs and push on it repeatedly. My daughter told me how he made weird faces at times and then closed his eyes and leaned back towards the end. I was so horrified and felt a wave of nausea rush through my body, so I had to go to the bathroom and throw up. What kind of sick person would make a 7-year-old girl do this kind of thing? Not to mention he worked at a school, and it was me who willfully sent my daughter near his vicinity. I kept bouncing between blaming myself and wanting to burn the entire world. My husband was no longer with us, so it was up to me to stand up for my daughter. I don't know what made me approach the school administration before the police, but that's exactly what I did. And the school administration laughed at me, saying that my daughter was clearly playing a prank. They said they had heard other students make similar jokes about the school counselor, and said that parents should teach their kids not to lie. By the time I made it to the police station, the school had already called them and explained the situation. They thought I was a crazy mother who was trying to give merit to my daughter's filthy lie. I had looked straight into my daughter's eyes when she told me this story, so I knew she was telling the truth. But no one wanted to believe me, and I felt like I was in a nightmare. This is when I remembered something important and ran back home to open my jewelry safe. Inside there was a note that I hadn't looked at for a long time. You see, although I was currently a doctor, I had been a very inexperienced nurse at one point. And one time, a very stern-looking man with a lot of face tattoos walked into our hospital with a bullet wound. No other nurse wanted to treat him since he looked so scary, so they sent me. I convinced myself that everyone deserves treatment and cleaned his wounds with the utmost concentration. I even engaged him in conversation and joked about how he should stay away from bullets in the future. When it was all over, the guy thanked me and handed me a note with his phone number on it. He said, "If you ever need someone taken care of, I won't ask for any payment." I typed in that phone number, and to my surprise, it actually connected. I told him who I was, and he said, "I remember you." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought about hanging up. What I was about to do wasn't part of who I had become as a woman, mother, or doctor. But I also wasn't just that. I was a wounded mother, betrayed by an entire system that claimed to protect, but sheltered monsters with diplomas and easy smiles. "What happened?" he asked with a deep voice. "If you got this far, it wasn't for nothing." I tried to speak, but my voice failed. I took a deep breath and swallowed hard. "It's about my daughter," I began. And then, without hiding anything, without embellishments, without self-censorship, I told him everything, from beginning to end. I told him how she came home trembling, how I was preparing rabanadas thinking it was just a bad day, until the moment she held that innocent unicorn in her hands and told me what that damn counselor did to her. I told him about the school laughing in my face, about the police looking at me like I was crazy, and I told him about the emptiness I felt now. The bitter taste of seeing my daughter sleeping, clutching the toy as if the trauma had poisoned it. "Give me his full name," he said after a heavy silence, "and everything you know about him. Address, car, routine, everything." Are you sure? You didn't call out of doubt. You already made your choice. I'm not a police officer. I'm not a lawyer. But I guarantee he'll never touch another child again. It was then that I understood. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I wrote down what he asked for, got everything I knew about the bastard. Names, schedules, even the color of his car and where he went for morning walks. I sent everything by message. Minutes later, he replied with just, "Understood." Nothing more. I went back to my daughter's room. She slept with a peaceful face, as if her little body was trying to forget the most horrible day of her life. I sat on the floor and cried right there in silence. I felt dirty for having resorted to that, but at the same time, I felt alive. For the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something real. The next day, I woke up with my heart racing. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, but my hand was shaking so much I dropped the mug. I picked up my phone. No messages, no calls. Life outside continued normally. My daughter went to school, the other school, because I would never let her go back to that one. I kissed her before she left with her grandmother, and I was alone, with the weight of what was to come. It was only at the end of the afternoon that the phone rang. "It's done," said the voice on the other end. "What does that mean?" "It means he'll never look at any child again. Not with his eyes, not with his heart, if he even had one." The call ended there. My legs went weak. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall. That was it. It had happened. But nothing appeared in the newspaper, no news on the radio, no headlines, just silence. I was afraid to ask more, afraid to discover the details. But part of me was at peace. The next day, the school principal called me. She said she deeply regretted the misunderstanding, that they were reevaluating the teaching staff, and that the counselor had requested leave for personal problems. I wanted to laugh, but I just said, "Now it's too late." I hung up, but the consequences began to emerge. The police came looking for me again. They said he had mysteriously disappeared, vanished from the map. No sign of him anywhere, no cameras, no card activity. He simply evaporated. They pretended it was a simple investigation, but I could feel in their eyes that they knew, and that they suspected me. There was no evidence, no fingerprints, no cameras, no witnesses, but they knew. I started sleeping poorly. I had nightmares with siren sounds, with the police knocking on my door, with my daughter looking at me scared. But at the same time, I also dreamed of him paying, crying, feeling fear, feeling what she felt. It was only days later that I received a last message from the number. "The debt has been paid. Now move forward." He wasn't the first, and from what I discovered, he wouldn't be the last. I deleted the message, deleted the number, burned the old note, and then I sat in my daughter's room, watching her play in silence. And in that moment, even knowing I had plunged into the shadows, for the first time, I didn't feel shame. I felt like I had saved her, that I did what no one else would do. And if someone dared to say it was wrong, I would stare back and ask, "What would you do if it were your daughter?" That question echoed in my head every day, on loop. It accompanied me while I washed dishes, while I drove to the hospital, while I treated patients who trusted me without even imagining what I had done, without knowing how far a mother can go for justice. And it wasn't just inside my head that things began to change. A week after the counselor's voluntary leave, the school sent an official letter to all parents, with generic apologies about procedures being reevaluated and recent concerns about professional conduct. They were trying to clean the school's image as if it were all just an administrative error. Pathetic. But children talk. My daughter came home at the end of that week saying that a little friend told her that the unicorn man had gone away because he was a bad man, and that other girls from other classes had also cried because of him. I felt my blood freeze. How many children had been hurt while the adults turned their faces away? I knew that what I did wouldn't erase what happened to my daughter. I knew she would still have nightmares, that maybe one day she would go to therapy and cry saying I should have protected her better. But I also knew that that monster wouldn't touch anyone else, that no other mother would have to hear what I heard. And that gave me strength to continue. However, like all temporary peace, this one also began to crack. One day, when I went to pick up my daughter at the new school, I saw a black car parked near the gate. 2 men inside. Tinted windows, but still, I noticed they were watching me. I pretended not to see. Took my daughter by the hand and went home. That night, another nightmare. But this time, it was different. I dreamed I was being judged. Not in a courtroom. It was something more symbolic. I was in a white room, surrounded by faces without eyes, and a voice repeated, "Good done by wrong hands. Is it still sin?" I woke up sweating. I got up from bed and went to the window. The same black car was parked across the street, motionless. No sign of movement. I picked up my phone, took a photo, called the police disguising my voice so as not to alarm my daughter. They wrote down the license plate, said they would investigate. They never got back to me. 2 days later, I received a summons to give testimony. It was about the disappearance of the school counselor. They alleged he might have been a victim of retaliation or involvement in crime. The blood disappeared from my face. I had been cautious. Too cautious. I hadn't left traces, and the man who helped me was someone from the underworld, invisible to the system. But what if, at the police station, the room was cold? The detective, a woman with hard eyes, asked me direct questions. Did you have any recent contact with the school counselor? No. Any disagreement with him? Only what I formally reported. My daughter reported inappropriate behavior. But the school said they found nothing concrete. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, I replied firmly. She looked at me like someone staring at a puzzle missing pieces. I held her gaze. Inside, my stomach was churning, but outside, I was a wall. And did you know anyone who might want to harm him? Probably many people. If what he did to children was a pattern, he must have collected enemies. The detective wrote something down and then dismissed me. I left there staggering, but with the conviction that my silence needed to last. That night, I locked all the doors, turned off the phone, slept with a baseball bat beside the bed. Days later, I was surprised by something that completely threw me off balance. I came home and found my daughter crying in the bathroom. She was holding the unicorn plush in her hands, squeezing it hard, as if she wanted to crush it. "What's wrong, my love?" She took a while to answer. She was sobbing so much she couldn't breathe. When she finally spoke, the words came cutting. I remember everything. I remembered his face. I dreamed. He made me promise I wouldn't tell. That if I told, he would appear at night and take you away. I felt my heart shatter. I knelt down and hugged her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to explode. But I just breathed with her until she calmed down, until her world fit back into a mother's arms. After she fell asleep, I went out on the balcony and faced the starry sky. I had done what I needed to do, but now I wanted more. It wasn't enough to have eliminated one man. I wanted the school, the principal, those who knew, those who laughed at me. They would be next. I wanted the school. That night, between my daughter's sobs and the rage pulsing under my skin, something inside me transformed. I was no longer just the mother seeking justice. I was no longer a woman in a white coat trying to maintain dignity before a rotten system. I was the storm they pretended not to see coming. I took my laptop and started digging, name by name, address by address. I entered the principal's full name in the public records search. I found her participation in educational councils, events, political meetings. She wasn't just an educator. She was a well-connected woman. Photos with councilmen, columns in local newspapers. She gave lectures on educational ethics. The irony corroded me. And then I found what I needed. An old complaint, filed away. 10 years ago, the same principal had been cited in a process involving omission in the face of inappropriate conduct by an employee, but the case had been covered up, archived for lack of evidence. Nothing happens by chance. That was a pattern. I printed everything, put together a dossier, attached reports from mothers in social media groups. Some, when they saw my anonymous post, sent messages telling about strange behaviors from the same counselor. No one had had the courage to expose it. Most silenced themselves out of fear of retaliation or shame. That's what they did. Covered up. Discredited. Destroyed. But not with me. The following week, I filed a formal complaint against the school administration. I hired a lawyer who had already sued institutions for serious moral damages. I gathered all the screenshots, audios, documents. I did everything legally, carefully, like a surgeon opening a festering wound. The school's response came quickly. A public note in the newspaper saying they deeply regretted that a mother's pain was transformed into unfounded attacks against the honor of dedicated professionals. Hypocrites. I began to be watched. My car was scratched. I received an anonymous letter with a sentence written in cutout letters. "You've already caused too many problems." I wasn't intimidated. If they wanted war, I would show them they were playing with fire until they found someone willing to burn everything down. At the hospital, my boss called me to talk. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked with a loaded voice. "Why the question?" I retorted. "We received an anonymous call saying that maybe you were emotionally unstable. An informal complaint." I held back my laughter. They wanted to destabilize me. They wanted to cut my voice where I was strongest. "I'm fine. And if you need an emotional certificate, I can ask my psychologist to write one." It was a lie. I had never done therapy in my life, but I needed to seem unshakable. The next day, my lawyer got a hearing with a prosecutor who, according to him, was the father of 3 girls. When he heard my report, his eyes filled with tears. "You bring me names? Evidence?" "I brought everything," I replied, pushing the dossier across the table. He leafed through it with the attention of a father who had just understood the real danger. "I'm going to take this forward. It may take time, but believe me, I won't file it away." When I left that building, my knees were shaking. I didn't know if the prosecutor would keep his word, but it was the first time I saw an adult face react with real empathy, without treating me like hysterical or a liar. But my daughter, she was still fighting her ghosts. One night, I woke up to a scream. I ran to her room and found her in panic, pointing at the closet door. "He was there, Mommy!" He appeared. I saw him. I hugged her tightly, holding her sweaty little hands. "He can't hurt you anymore. Never again." Deep down, I knew that trauma wouldn't go away with a "it's over." That would stick to her like a shadow. But it was my mission now to guide that girl through the darkness with every firm step I took outside. Every name exposed, every action taken, every person held accountable. All of this would be a brick in the protection wall around her. But the enemies multiplied. I received emails from fake accounts, veiled threats. One of them said, "You want to bring down the school? You'll fall with it." I didn't delete it. I saved everything, showed it to my lawyer. He sighed. "We're bothering the right people." And then, something happened. An investigative journalist contacted me. He said he saw my complaint and was following the case, that he had internal sources, that there was a pattern of protecting aggressors within the school network, not just at this school. He said that this counselor, the one who disappeared, had already been through other institutions, and that the current principal, guess what, had been responsible for protecting another employee involved in a scandal covered up in the neighboring city. It was bigger than I thought. I was inside a system, a sick system, but I was no longer a fragile piece. I was the short circuit. And deep in my chest, while watching my daughter sleep, I promised myself, as long as I'm alive, no child will be silenced like mine was. That phrase became my fuel, but it also became my sentence. The following days became a careful dance between my work, the veiled threats, and the constant fear of being followed. I started changing my routes. I began leaving my daughter with the neighbor instead of going straight to pick her up at school. I always watched rearview mirrors. I always distrusted cars that slowed down too close. But I continued. The journalist who contacted me got back in touch, this time with something even more disturbing. "I have a recording," he said, in a low tone, almost afraid of being heard even through the call. "Of what?" I asked, with my heart racing. "A conversation between the principal and another employee. It was recorded by a janitor. They talk about controlling the narrative and mention that they can't allow the doctor to destabilize the school's structure. And more, there's a part where she says that the counselor knew too much." The words left me frozen. The bastard who hurt my daughter knew too much? They knew? "Can you send me that?" I asked. "Yes, but be careful. You've stirred up a hornet's nest. And now there are more people watching you than you imagine." Hearing that recording was like taking a punch. The principal spoke coldly. She used expressions like, "The media forgets quickly," and "the institution's reputation is more important than an unbalanced child." I trembled with rage. And more than ever, I felt I was right. They didn't just know what was happening. They chose to protect the aggressor. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked him to double the security measures around the case. He suggested I leave home for a while. Stay in a hotel. Don't tell anyone where you are. Take your daughter and disappear for a few days. We'll file the recordings with the prosecutor's office, with total secrecy. That's what I did. I told the hospital I would take leave for personal reasons. I took my daughter and went to an inn far from the city, a place without much movement, surrounded by forest, with simple cabins. I thought it would be good for her to breathe different air. I thought the world would feel lighter. But trauma travels with us. On a rainy night, she had another crisis. She woke up screaming, saying she heard the unicorn's noise and that the man was going to come through the window. I hugged her tightly, sang softly the song she liked, and swore everything would be okay. But I was shattered. Nothing prepared me to see my daughter fighting with such heavy memories in such a small body. The next day, I received an envelope under the cabin door. No address, no mark, just a sheet with large letters written by hand. "You can run, but you're dragging an innocent child into the fire with you. Stop." I was paralyzed. The first thing I thought was, how did they find us here? I called the inn's administration. They hadn't seen anything. No strangers, no one knew. But someone knew. Someone was monitoring my steps. I made my daughter pack her bag immediately. We drove for almost 3 hours until we stopped in a smaller city where a doctor friend had a country house. I called her, explained briefly, and she welcomed us without hesitation. There, at least, there was some sense of security. But even there, the tension wouldn't leave me. I woke up several times a night with noises that were probably just in my head. Sounds of steps, wood creaking, whispered voices. I was constantly alert. I slept with a knife under the pillow. Meanwhile, the prosecutor filed the first action against the principal, based on the recordings. The journalist published an article that, even with the name suppressed, made it clear who the doctor involved was. The local community exploded, comments calling me unbalanced. Others saying I was too brave to be real. Mothers started talking. One of them, whose son had been transferred from school 2 years before, wrote an anonymous letter that reached me. She reported something similar: inappropriate touching, strange games with dolls, and the child's fear of being punished if he told. I started gathering everything. It was like putting together a dark puzzle. And the more pieces emerged, the clearer it became. The school was a machine for silencing victims. And now, this machine was trying to crush me. But something inside me, maybe the same instinct that made me call that man in the past, told me I couldn't stop. That if I backed down now, every mother who dared to speak after me would be treated as crazy. That my daughter, one day, would grow up and understand everything, and would ask me if I fought for her to the end. And I want to be able to look into her eyes and say, yes, I fought until the last thread of strength, but I was exhausting myself. The days in that country house gave me the false sensation of security, as if we were in a bubble protected from reality. But as soon as the night's silence fell, I went back to feeling hunted. My daughter slept better there, maybe because she didn't recognize the environment, maybe by instinct. But I felt like a cornered animal. Every noise, every phone notification, every car headlight at the gate made me jump up. It was on a calm afternoon that everything exploded. The journalist called me. His voice trembled. The story gained traction. It was shared by a national page. The press is looking for names. And is that good or bad? I asked with a weight in my throat. It's going to hurt, but it's necessary. I knew. When you throw the truth at the fan, the dirt doesn't choose where it lands. And I was about to be hit by all the mud that school had hidden for years. The next morning, my name was everywhere. Doctor denounces school abuse network. Victim's mother moves investigation in traditional school. Vigilante mother or unbalanced? What's behind the bombshell complaint? The comments on social media were a battlefield. Half the people called me a hero. The other half accused me of making everything up to gain fame or money. They said I was histrionic, that I influenced my daughter with false memories, that no 7-year-old child could tell that with so many details. I read, felt my stomach turn, and closed the tab. My daughter saw one of these headlines while using the tablet. She turned to me and asked, "Mom, why are they talking about us?" "Because Mommy told the truth, my love, and there are people who don't like to hear the truth." She fell silent, then went back to the cartoon. I went to the bathroom and cried softly, leaning against the door. And then, the unexpected happened. A former teacher from the school contacted me. She had resigned 3 years before. She sent me a message to the email I used to file the complaint and asked to talk in person. We met at a discreet cafe. She was a woman in her 50s, thick glasses, serious face. She looked around before speaking. "I saw things," she began. "Many things. I suspected the counselor and the principal. There was a strange tension whenever she talked to him, excessive care. But I only really understood when a student told me she didn't want to play the unicorn game anymore. She was crying. She was scared. I took this to the principal. And the next day, I received a warning. Either withdraw the complaint, or my professional life would be destroyed. And you? I asked. I resigned. I kept quiet, out of cowardice, out of fear, until today. She handed me a folder with old reports, internal emails, including a memo from the administration with an extra clause. Any conduct that could denigrate the school's image should be immediately silenced and treated internally. That was gold, proof that the cover-up was institutionalized. I showed everything to my lawyer. He reacted with wide eyes. This is enough to open a criminal investigation against the administration. That week, the prosecutor who supported me got authorization. The school was officially investigated. Search warrants were issued. And for the first time, the arrogant faces of the principal and her accomplices appeared pale in the news. But with that came the backlash. My bank account was hacked. A considerable amount was transferred to an overseas account. The police called me, insinuating that I might be trying to launder money with the media exposure. My name was dragged through the mud for a few weeks. My medical license was put under evaluation by pressure from an anonymous complaint. I was suspended from the hospital where I worked for institutional prudence. That was it. The machine trying to grind me up. And then, one night, I received a call that made me tremble. "Hi, Unicorn Girl's mom," said a male voice, nasal, mocking. "I hope you're proud. You may have brought down one, but there were more people in this little game. And when the police start digging, you'll realize you messed with a spider web. And you know what the spider does to those who touch it? The phone hung up. For the first time, in a long time, I felt real fear. Not just for me, but for her, for my daughter, for my mother who was taking care of her while I dealt with lawyers, with journalists, with investigations. I went to the window. In the dark, I swore I saw someone standing in the street, motionless, a shadow. I couldn't identify it, but I understood the message. They were warning you went too far. But what they still didn't know is that there's no too far for a mother with blood in her eyes. If they thought I was going to back down now, it was because they still hadn't met what a woman can become when everything is taken from her. Peace, career, her daughter's innocence. I wasn't going to stop. I was going to finish what I started, even if it was with my own hands. But I didn't need to. The morning after that threatening call, I received news that pierced my chest like an arrow. The principal had been arrested. It wasn't because of me, not directly. The investigation network had revealed something even bigger, a scheme to protect aggressors within the municipal network. Everything tied up with false donations, forged documents, and criminal omissions. She tried to escape, but was caught in a neighboring city, trying to use her sister's name at a cheap hotel. When the police arrived, she claimed she was on leave to take care of her mental health. Ironic. The same woman who laughed at my daughter's pain now said she was shaken. The news exploded in the newspapers. The journalist who had helped me published an extensive article with testimonies from former employees, students, and mothers. And this time, people listened. Because there were faces, documents, evidence. Because there were real bodies carrying traumas that could no longer be ignored. In the following days, I received dozens of messages from fathers and mothers, some apologizing for having doubted, others thanking me for speaking up. A woman whose son had taken his own life 2 years before told me she always suspected the school, but no one ever believed her. I cried reading that message. I cried for all the voices that tried before me and were silenced. But the personal consequences were still there. I stayed away from work for months. I had to file a formal lawsuit to reestablish my medical license and prove that the accusations of emotional instability were a setup. I won, but the taste of victory came with the weight of everything I lost. My daughter started therapy. At first, she just drew, didn't speak, made unicorns with sad eyes and windows with bars. But with time, she began to verbalize. The psychologist told me that, although the trauma was deep, she was reacting. She was rebuilding herself. And one day, on the way home, she told me something I keep to this day. Mom, thank you for not pretending nothing happened. That was worth more than any sentence, headline, or legal victory. A year later, I received an invitation to participate in a medical congress on child mental health. I declined. I wasn't ready yet. But when I went to the bookstore one day, I saw my name cited in a book report about the case. They spoke of me as the mother who set silence on fire. I smiled, not out of vanity, but for knowing that that woman, who once prepared rabanadas thinking her daughter was just sad, had become a force that brought down giants. As for the man on the call, I never heard from him again. Neither the first one, the tattooed one I spoke with that night, nor any other involved. It was as if they had dissolved into thin air, a dirty piece of the world that lent me its shadow to do justice, and then disappeared. Today, I live more simply. I moved to a smaller city. My daughter studies at a school where all teachers know her name and her story, where she can breathe. I went back to practicing as a doctor, but part-time. The rest of the time, I dedicate to guiding mothers who went through the same as me. I've participated in investigations, helped lawyers, written articles, some published, others blocked, but all sincere. And with each new report that arrives, each new mother who tells me no one believed me, I remember what brought me here. The smell of rabanadas, my daughter's look, the paper with that tattooed man's number. Today, people call me strong, a warrior, but I know who I am. I'm a woman who saw the abyss in her own daughter's eyes and decided to jump into it to tear the monster out with her own hands. And if that makes me dangerous in their eyes, then great. Because mothers like me, who lost their fear, are exactly the type of woman these monsters should fear. Did you like the story? Then don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories. Here, every story is told with emotion, courage, and that touch of justice everyone loves to see. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been through something similar, know that you're not alone. See you in the next video. Until then.
My brother got me kicked out of the house so he could use my room as a game room. And now, years later, after discovering that I bought my own house, my parents are demanding that I give it to him. When I was younger, I lived with my mom, my stepdad, and my younger half-brother. My brother was always their favorite because my mom hated seeing me as I reminded her of my dad, whom she had cheated on, and for some reason she blamed me for it. I was often ignored and left out. For years, I tried to ignore this and get by, but the situation became unbearable when I was about 14 years old. My brother was spoiled and always got what he wanted. He was really into video games, and over time, he started complaining that the house didn't have enough space for him to have his own game room, something he had seen somewhere and now wanted. My parents then started hinting that I should leave the house so my brother could use my room as his game room. At first, I thought they were joking since they often told me to leave the house and that my presence there was useless. But then I realized they were serious. They began pressuring me to leave, saying that I was practically an adult and it was time to move on. I told them that I wasn't even old enough to have a job yet, had nowhere to go, and was far from being an adult. But as time passed, they decided it was time for me to go. And one day I came home from school to find all my belongings thrown on the sidewalk. It was incredibly tough. I had to go from shelter to shelter until an angel appeared and adopted me. She was a police officer who lived near the shelter where I stayed the most, and we got to know each other. A few months later, she took me to live with her and eventually adopted me. Honestly, if it weren't for her, I don't know how I would have managed to move forward. Years went by and I did my best to move on. I worked hard, studied, and saved enough money to buy my own house with my own business. I couldn't have done it without my adoptive mother for sure, as she financed my education and helped me pay to start my business. Now that things were going well for me, I also bought a house for her so she could get out of renting. However, when my biological family found out that I had bought a house, and a house for my adoptive mother, apparently because the guy who sold me the house was a friend of my family, everything got worse again. It started with a message from my stepfather, dry and direct, as if he had never thrown me out on the street. "We heard about your new house. It was about time you did something for the family that raised you." That made me immediately nauseous. Family that raised me? The same one that expelled me at 14 so the little prince could have space to play gamer? The same one that never gave me a hug, everything will be okay, a plate of hot food when I went to sleep crying? The same one that left me at the mercy of the street without even wondering if I would survive? The next day, my mother called me. The last time I heard her voice was in a scream telling me to get off the sidewalk because I was disrupting the facade of the house. I answered on impulse, maybe wanting to understand how far they would go with this shamelessness. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I was happy, if I was healthy. No. She went straight to the point. "Your brother is getting married and needs a place to start his life. You don't need 2 houses." I felt such deep anger that my hand started to shake. I took a deep breath and answered as calmly as I could. "You want me to hand over the house I fought for years to conquer to someone who never had to fight for anything in life? Just because he's getting married?" And she, without hesitation, said, "He's your brother. Family helps family." I almost laughed. Family helps family. I slept on park benches, hungry and afraid. Family helps family. Where were they when I needed new shoes to go to school? Where were they when I was beaten in one of the shelters and no one showed up to visit me in the hospital? I hung up without saying anything else. I thought I would have peace after that. But I underestimated their capacity to cross all limits. Days later, messages from unknown numbers started. One of them said, "You're going to regret turning your back on your family." Another, "You have a blood debt to us." My adoptive mother even received an anonymous message saying she was interfering too much in a family that wasn't hers. That really got to me. I went to the police station to file a report. I already had contacts. I already knew what to do. I was different from the fragile boy they had expelled years ago. And more, I had a name, I had a clean record, I had proof. But it didn't stop there. What really made me explode was when my former schoolmate, now a neighbor of my biological parents, told me that my mother was going around telling everyone in the neighborhood that I was ungrateful, that the house I had bought was an inheritance from my father, the same father she cheated on and hated, and that I had renounced my blood for money. That was the last straw. If war was what they wanted, war is what they would get. That night I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, mulling over every word, every unresolved memory, every scar they had left on me. It was as if, after years of rebuilding myself, they had torn a piece of my soul and spat on it with contempt. I wasn't going to let it slide. For the first time, I decided to face it head-on. Not for me, but for that 14-year-old version of myself, who cried hugging his own clothes thrown on the sidewalk while his brother got a PS5 with the money that should have been for my school uniform. The next morning, I went to the neighborhood where I grew up, not because I felt nostalgic, but because I wanted to look them in the face and show them what they had lost. I parked my new car in front of the old peeling house that I was once forced to call home. It was still the same colorless place, but now with more cracks, more trash in front, and an even more decadent air. I rang the doorbell firmly, knowing that hell was about to begin. The one who opened the door was my brother, now in his early 20s with a beer belly that didn't match his age, and the same spoiled look as always. When he saw me, his eyes widened and he tried to force a cynical smile. "Hey, bro, did you come to hand over the keys?" I laughed. In his face. A dry laugh, one of those that burns in your throat from so much accumulated contempt. "No, I came to tell you that if you or our parents contact me again, I'll take you all to court for moral harassment, slander, and attempted extortion. And I have proof. Oh, and one more thing," I said, taking my phone out of my pocket and showing the recording of my mother's call, the messages, the screenshots of the threats. "The lawyer already has all of this." He went pale. "You're exaggerating. It's just a house." "It's not just a house. It's my life. It's everything I conquered with sweat, tears, and an immense desire to never again depend on people like you." He tried to argue, but my mother appeared at the door. She still had that look of disdain, as if I were a stain on her family's perfection. But something changed when she realized I was serious, very serious, when she saw that I was no longer the quiet boy, but a man who knew how to defend himself. "Are you really willing to turn your back on your own mother?" "I don't have a mother. The woman who raised me is doing very well in the house I gave her. You just gave birth to me, and even that, and maybe it was against your will." She was speechless. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my biological mother without words, and it was in that silence that I said goodbye. Not with tears, with relief. I went home that day with a light heart. I knew it wouldn't be the end of the war, but I had taken the first real confrontational stance. I was no longer running away, and they realized that. But as I predicted, they didn't back down, and their next attack would be dirtier than I could imagine. I should have predicted that they wouldn't accept a no. People like them don't back down. They just resort to the next lowest form of manipulation. And that's exactly what they did. Less than a week after my visit, my phone rang again. It was a social worker. At first, I thought it was some bureaucracy related to my business, maybe some inspection process, but the call shocked me. "Sir, I received an anonymous report saying that the lady who lives with you, your adoptive mother, is being kept in abusive conditions, that she's being prevented from leaving the house, that she's being financially exploited." Right then, my blood ran cold. Not because of the content of the report, because it was obviously false, but because I knew exactly where it had come from. "I can guarantee that this is absurd," I said, swallowing my anger. "My mother is free, independent, and her money is safe. She has a card, a bank account, and more freedom than many people out there. But if you want, you can come here and talk to her personally." And that's what they did. 2 days later, they knocked on my door. A social worker and a representative from the elderly council. They asked questions, inspected everything, talked to my mother, and when she understood what was happening, her eyes filled with tears of indignation. "They're trying to destroy you again, my son," she said, hugging me tight. "But now you're not alone. They won't succeed." When the agents left and saw that everything was perfectly in order, I asked them to register in an official report that the complaint was unfounded. But I wasn't going to stop there. I called my lawyer, and this time I took the word lawsuit seriously. Enough veiled threats. They had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Meanwhile, rumors started appearing on the city's social media. My parents, of course, were spreading stories that I had bewitched that policewoman, that she adopted me out of interest, and that now I used her money to buy houses and show off. As if I hadn't spent years selling candy on street corners to pay for prep courses, as if I hadn't made every damn delivery, worked as a waiter, alternated between shifts, sleepless nights, and days studying until I fell asleep. I could have ignored it, let it go, but something in me burned for justice. So I contacted a local journalist, a college friend, and told him my whole story, from abandonment to adoption to struggle to victory. He was shocked. I asked him not to mention names, just tell the story of a boy rejected by his family who rebuilt his own life with the help of a woman who loved him without any obligation. The article came out 2 days later with the headline, "The boy who was thrown away and built an empire with love and resilience." That was the trigger. My phone exploded with messages. People I had never seen sent me support. People commented, "I knew you at school. They really treated you like trash." Others said, "This woman is a hero, and you're an example." And of course, my parents saw it too, and they couldn't stand it. My mother called me again, crying, but not from regret, from anger. "How could you expose our family like this?" I didn't expose anyone. I just told the truth. The shame isn't mine. And I hung up. That day was the first I slept with my soul at peace. But their game wasn't over yet, and the next move would be even dirtier. I thought that after the article they would back down. I thought that maybe, faced with public opinion, they would be ashamed to continue digging their own grave. But I underestimated the type of people who feed on poison. When they lost the narrative, they also lost any mask that remained. And what they did next showed me that they no longer just wanted the house, they wanted to destroy me. It started with a court summons, a lawsuit filed against me. Reason? Improper appropriation of family inheritance. Yes, you read that right, too. My biological parents claimed that the house I bought, with my own work, in my name, with the deed registered and paid off, had been bought with money that, according to them, came from a supposed inheritance from my biological father. That same father who died without leaving even an old watch, and whom my mother cheated on and detested. They were claiming that I had appropriated something that belonged to the family clan, as if I had ever been part of a clan. And to complete the delusion, they attached distorted conversations, truncated messages, and even a witness to the lawsuit. The gossipy neighbor who swore he heard my adoptive mother say that the house had been a gift from a relative. I laughed. Really? Because it was so absurd it bordered on comical. But my lawyer didn't find it funny. He explained to me that even though it was a case without legal basis, the lawsuit could hinder me, block transactions, damage my name in the market, create friction with clients. And more, they were trying to use justice as a weapon of revenge. That's when I understood. This wasn't just about a house. It was personal. They couldn't stand seeing me win. They couldn't stand the fact that, despite everything they did, I had succeeded, that the plan to erase me had failed, and that the boy they kicked to the street had become someone who could tell his own story and be heard. But I wasn't going to back down. I started preparing. I organized all the documents, all the receipts, contracts, construction photos, bank transfers. I asked my adoptive mother to give a written statement, and she did it with tears in her eyes. She reported everything, from the day she found me at the shelter to the moment she signed my adoption, including the nights she took me to the hospital with anxiety attacks because of the trauma from rejection. And while we were preparing to respond legally, something unexpected happened. I received a message from my brother's wife, or rather, from his fiancée. A huge message. She said she was reconsidering the marriage, that she never knew the complete story, that she had believed the family's versions because, in her words, no one would invent something so horrible against their own son. But after she read the article and saw the screenshots that leaked in the comments, She started putting the pieces together. She told me that my brother was aggressive, controlling, that he lived with fits of rage, and that now, with the wedding approaching, he was becoming someone she barely recognized. And then, she dropped the bomb. I just wanted to apologize to you and thank you. If it weren't for your story, maybe I would be about to make the worst mistake of my life. I responded respectfully, wishing her strength, making it clear that I held no grudge against her. The fault wasn't hers. It was from those who always thought they could manipulate everything and everyone without consequences. And there I realized something. The most powerful revenge wasn't destroying. It was living so well that their existence seemed insignificant. But the story still wasn't over. They still had one more blow saved up, and it would be the dirtiest of all. I thought I had already seen everything coming from them, but the final blow was so dirty, so low, that for a moment I felt like that 14-year-old boy again, standing on the sidewalk with a torn backpack, trying to understand how someone can be so cruel to their own blood. The lawsuit hearing was approaching. My lawyer was confident. We had all the necessary documents, irrefutable proof, and the judge had already requested an audit of the accounts and properties involved. Everything pointed to them being officially unmasked, with a stamp and everything. And that's when they decided to play dirty one last time. On the eve of the hearing, my adoptive mother had an accident, a hit and run, at her front door, in broad daylight. And the driver? An acquaintance of the biological family, a guy who used to frequent my mother's parties when I still lived with them. He claimed that she ran in front of the car suddenly, but witnesses said otherwise. They said he saw her crossing, accelerated, and only braked after hitting her. My mother broke her leg, had scrapes, but thank God wasn't in mortal danger. Even so, the psychological impact was devastating. She cried, saying it was her fault, that they were trying to hurt her because they could no longer reach me, and that destroyed me. I stayed by her hospital bed for hours, looking at the woman who saved me from the gutter, now lying there, hurt because of me, or rather, because of them. And I swore right there that this was going to have an end, a real end. The next day, I went to the hearing with my soul on fire. I entered the room with a calm face, but inside, every cell in my body wanted to scream. My parents were there. My brother, too. In formal clothes, pretending to be victims of an ungrateful son. The same performance as always. But this time, it wasn't going to work. My lawyer started presenting the documents, bank reports, testimonies. The judge seemed attentive, professional, but her expression changed with each piece of evidence until it was my turn to speak, and I spoke. For 30 minutes, I told everything, from the ignored childhood to the suitcases on the sidewalk, from the shelters to the nights on the street to the reunion with life thanks to the woman they were trying to destroy now. When I finished, no one was breathing. My parents were pale. My brother lowered his eyes. The judge then asked for silence and said a phrase that still echoes in my mind. This court does not exist to validate emotional blackmail, nor to reward parents who abandon their children. Case dismissed with prejudice to the plaintiffs. And furthermore, given the evidence presented, I recommend to the prosecutor's office the opening of an investigation for false accusation, false testimony, and attempted fraud. I won. But more than that, they lost. Lost in front of everyone. Lost control. Lost the narrative. Lost their moral standing, if they ever had any. And it still wasn't over. I filed a lawsuit for moral damages. I demanded a protective measure for my adoptive mother. I filed a report against the hit-and-run driver, and I initiated judicial freezing of my brother's assets, since he was using his fiancée's company name, who had now canceled the wedding, to launder money from illegal online gambling. Yes, I went all the way, because they deserved every second of consequence. I went home that night and found my adoptive mother waiting for me with a tired but genuine smile. She hugged me and said, "Now you're free, my son." And for the first time, I felt it was true. But there was something that still needed to be done, something I owed to my inner child. And it would be the final piece of this story. The lawsuit was over. Justice was done. But I still felt empty. Something inside me remained restless, as if the wound had been closed, but still pulsed from everything that wasn't said, from everything I had to swallow over the years. I didn't just want justice on paper. I wanted them to hear me. I wanted them to look me in the eyes and see, really see, who they had lost. That's when I decided to organize a meeting. Not to rebuild bonds, that would never be possible again, but to end the story my way. I sent a direct message to the family group, that same group they removed me from when I was expelled, and wrote, "You have 15 minutes of my time, tomorrow, at noon. If you want to hear what you're afraid to face, show up." The next day, in the event hall of my adoptive mother's house, the house I bought for her with pride, I prepared 2 chairs and a recorder, one for me, another for whoever had the courage to come. I didn't expect them to come, but they came. My mother, my stepfather, and my brother, with his usual cowardly look, now without a fiancé, without money, and according to what I heard, about to be evicted. They sat as if they were victims. They murmured, "We're here to talk," but I didn't let them start with their narrative. I took the recorder's microphone, pressed rec, and spoke. I want this conversation to be recorded, not for justice, nor for social media, but for myself, to never forget who I was, who you tried to erase, and who I became despite you. My mother tried to interrupt, saying she was sick, that everyone makes mistakes. But I stopped her with a gesture. Mistakes? A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is yelling in the middle of a fight. What you did was abandonment. It was premeditated cruelty. You threw a child out on the street. A child, to satisfy the whims of a spoiled boy. My stepfather snorted, saying I was always ungrateful, that they had their problems. And do you think I didn't have mine? I slept on cold floors. I was kicked from shelter to shelter. I grew up learning to swallow pain, while you were feeding the ego of a kid who never had to work, who today lives trying to extort the only person who managed to win alone. You didn't raise a son. You raised a parasite. My brother remained silent. For the first time, perhaps, understanding that his image was no longer protected by the cloak of my mother's lies. The mask had fallen. "I don't hate you," I continued, facing each of them, "because hating would still require that you meant something to me. And today, you don't. What moves me now is gratitude. Gratitude for having expelled me. Because without that, I would never have met my real mother. I would never have found my strength. And I would never have learned that family isn't blood. Family is who lifts you up when everyone turns their backs." I stood up, pressed stop on the recorder, and finished. Now, yes, I'm free. They said nothing. They couldn't. And I left, without looking back. Months later, I received a notification that my biological mother had applied for social assistance. The damages lawsuit continued, and their lives crumbled. But I felt no pleasure in that. I felt peace, because now I knew who I was. I knew what I had conquered. And above all, I knew that my story was one of victory, not revenge. Today, I give lectures on overcoming adversity. My company grew, and my adoptive mother, my real mother, lives with me, full of health, surrounded by friends who treat her like the queen she is. And every time I look in the mirror, I see not only the reflection of someone who won, but the calm gaze of someone who went to hell and came back building bridges.